The mountains of Montana Territory did not forgive. High in the Bitterroots, the first snow already dusted the peaks. Below in the valleys, the pines stood thick and dark in the early light. A man moved through the forest, rifle resting easy across his chest. His dog ranged ahead. The woods were too quiet today. No birds, no wind. Then a low growl rolled through the trees, followed by a woman's raw, desperate scream. Another scream came, closer, thick with pain. The sound of claws tearing flesh. The mountain man ran. He crashed through the brush, snow flying from his boots, and burst into a small clearing stained red. She lay there, a slight woman, eyes wide but seeing nothing. Still, her hands moved with purpose, slashing blindly with a small knife. The cougar circled her, blood on its muzzle, muscles coiled to strike. The man raised his rifle. The big cat gathered itself. His finger tightened on the trigger. And in that frozen heartbeat, the mountains held their silence. October 1882. Montana Territory. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet. Ilias Cord moved through the pines the way water moves through rock. Slow, quiet, without asking permission. His breath came out in small white clouds that disappeared before they reached the branches above him. The snow was fresh, maybe 4 inches overnight. Enough to cover yesterday's tracks, but not enough to make the going hard. Enough to muffle the sound. Enough to make the world feel like it was keeping a secret it hadn't decided to share yet. He'd been up since before dawn, which was normal. He didn't sleep much anymore. Hadn't for 4 years. There was something about the dark hours, between 2 and 5 in the morning, that felt like a punishment he'd agreed to without knowing he was signing anything. The hours when the cabin was too quiet and the fire had burned down, and the only sound was the wind finding the gaps in the chinking and the occasional shift of Buck's weight on the floor. Those hours had their own particular quality, heavy, personal, like they were designed specifically for him and no one else. So he walked instead. He checked his trap line every morning before the light came fully in. 6 trap spreads across 2 miles of terrain. He knew the way most men know their own kitchen. This boulder, that frozen creek with the ice that cracked like a gunshot when the temperature dropped fast. The stand of 3 twisted pines on the eastern slope that looked like old men arguing about something they'd long since forgotten the origin of. He'd named them, never told anyone that. There was no one to tell. Buck moved through the snow beside him. The dog was some mix of shepherd and something larger. Something that had come from the mountains themselves, maybe, or at least from dogs who had. Gray-brown, heavy-coated, silent unless silence wasn't the right answer. He'd had Buck for 6 years, since the dog was barely a year old and still had the oversized paws of a creature that hadn't fully grown into itself. The dog knew when to speak and when not to. More than most people Elias had encountered in his 41 years on this earth. The first trap was empty. Reset. Move. The second had a marten. Good fur, clean catch. He added it to the pack and kept moving. The third was empty. The fourth had a rabbit. Clean catch. Quick death. He reset the mechanism with hands that barely felt the cold anymore. Hands that had been cold for so long they'd accepted it as their natural state and kept moving. The rabbits were everywhere this year, which meant something was eating the rabbits was not everywhere. That was the math of mountains. Everything in balance. Everything feeding something else. The 5th trap was on the north-facing slope, where the pines grew so thick the snow barely reached the ground. He liked this part of the trap line best. The density of the trees made it feel smaller than the Opah Mountain, more contained, more like something a man could get his arms around. He was thinking about the 5th trap's placement, whether to move it 20 yards west, where the deer trails ran heavier, when he heard it, a scream, not an animal sound. He knew animal sounds. He knew every variation of distress and warning and territorial claim that the creatures of these mountains produced. He knew the sound a rabbit made when a hawk took it. He knew the bark of a fox and the shriek of an owl and the cough of a cougar announcing itself in the dark. This was none of those things. This was a woman. He was running before the second sound finished. Echoing off the ridge, his rifle, came off his shoulder without conscious decision. His feet found purchase on the icy slope, without him telling them where to go. The trees blurred past on either side, and Buck was already ahead of him, already having decided what needed to happen, and moving toward it with the certainty of a creature that does not second-guess its own instincts. He smelled the blood before he saw her, iron and copper, warm against the cold air. The smell of something that should be inside a body and was now outside it. The cougar was on her back, large, female, winter lean and desperate in the way that mountain lions get in the hard months when prey is scarce, and hunger makes decisions that hunger alone can make. She had the woman pinned face down in the snow, claws working at her. Claws working left shoulder with the mechanical efficiency of a creature that knows exactly what it's doing. Teeth finding the base of her neck, searching for the purchase that would end this quickly. The woman was still fighting. That was the first thing Elias registered. Before anything else, before the blood or the cougar or the specific geography of what was happening, she was still fighting. Her right arm was free. She was pushing back against the ground, trying to create space that physics and 150 pounds of mountain lion were not going to give her. Losing, but pushing, with a stubbornness that was almost abstract. Stubbornness of someone who has decided, at some fundamental level below thought, that they are not going to stop. Buck hit the cougar from the side. Not a killing blow, the dog was big, but the cougar was bigger. But it was enough. The cougar turned, released the woman's neck, swung toward this new threat with the precise economy of a predator reassessing, which bought Elias exactly 1 second. He took the shot, single round, placed with the care of a man who had been shooting in these mountains for 4 years and who understood that a wounded cougar was a different and worse problem than an unwounded one. The cougar dropped sideways into the snow and did not move again. Silence fell back down over the pines like it had only stepped aside briefly and was now returning to its usual place, the kind of silence that follows a gunshot in the mountains. Absolute ring. Elias was kneeling beside the woman before the echo finished. "I've got you," he said. "Stop moving. I've got you." She didn't stop moving. Her elbow caught him in the jaw. Not hard. She didn't have the strength for hard. Not right now, but hard enough that he sat back for half a second and reassessed the situation. She was face down, fighting to push herself upright, and she had no idea where he was or what he was, or whether the thing that had been on top of her had been replaced by something else that also meant her harm, ma'am. Don't. The word came out in a wet, broken sound. Don't touch. Then she went limp. Not dead. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat before the thought was even complete. Pulse there. Fast and thready, but there. Her coat was shredded across the left shoulder and upper back. The wounds were deep, deeper than he'd hoped. The snow around her was turning red in a way that meant he didn't have the luxury of standing around being careful about anything. He pulled off his outer coat, packed the worst wounds as best he could. Pressure, that was the first thing, the only thing that bought time. He worked fast and without ceremony. There was no ceremony available. There was only the next action and the action after that. He lifted her. She weighed less than he expected, which was not a good sign. A person who weighs less than they should has not been eating enough, has not been resting enough, has been burning through reserves that should have been maintained. She had been running on something other than adequate nutrition for some time. "All right," he said to no one in particular. "All right." 4 miles back to the cabin, he started walking. Buck led the way, moving ahead to check the trail and then doubling back, the efficient pattern of a dog who understands escort work without having been formally trained in it. The woman's head rested against Elias's chest. Her hair was dark brown and matted with blood and pine needles. He couldn't tell much else about her face from this angle. He kept his eyes on the trail, and his mind on the next 100 yards and then the 100 yards after that. That was the only way to cover distance when distance was the enemy. 1 piece at a time. Don't look at the whole of it. About a mile in, she said something. Faint, almost nothing. He thought at first it might be the wind. Easy, he said. My bag. Her hand found the front of his shirt, gripped it, weak but deliberate. The grip of someone who is not fully conscious but who has not stopped having priorities. Don't leave my bag. He'd left her bag at the scene, which meant he had to go back for it, which he did. After he got her to the cabin, after he'd done what needed doing with the wounds. After. But the fact that she'd thought of it, the fact that through the blood loss and the shock and the cold and the pain of a cougar attack, she'd thought to ask about the bag. That was a thing he noted, filed it away in the part of his mind that kept track of things that didn't add up yet but would eventually. Kept walking. The cabin was 4 miles south, and he covered them without stopping and without thinking about anything. Except the terrain underfoot and the weight in his arms and the interval between her breaths against his chest, which he was counting without meaning to, because the counting told him she was still there. The cabin was small and functional, and exactly what a man who expected no visitors would build. One stone fireplace along the east wall. He'd placed it there deliberately, so the heat moved toward the sleeping platform and not away from it. 2 windows, one facing east, one south. A table. 2 chairs, though the second one hadn't been used in years. A sleeping platform along the north wall with a wool blanket and a bare hide over it. Tools on the wall, each hung in the place that made the most sense for reaching it quickly. A rifle above the door. A smaller handgun on the shelf near the fireplace, loaded. Where a person who needed it fast could get to it fast. He'd built it himself in the autumn of 1878, after. He didn't let himself finish that thought. He rarely did. He put her on the sleeping platform. Got the fire built up high. Not comfortable high, working high. The kind of heat that brings a person back from the edge of the cold. That gets into a wounded body and tries to stay. Then he looked at the wounds in proper light for the first time, and spent a moment being grateful she was unconscious. The cougar had done significant damage. Left shoulder. Deep, the claws had gone through the coat and the layers beneath and found muscle. Upper back, 3 separate tears, the pattern of a paw swipe. The neck, thank God, was superficial. The teeth had skidded off bone, rather than finding anything vital. Her right thigh had a wound he hadn't even noticed until he'd removed the shredded outer layers of clothing, because the blood from the shoulder wounds had masked it. He'd learned field medicine from a fur trapper named Abernathy, who'd spent 30 years in these mountains and had the scarred hands to prove it. Abernathy had been of the opinion that you either learned how to sew a body back together, or you accepted that people died around you with some regularity, and the choice was yours to make. Elias had learned. He'd learned thoroughly, because the alternative Abernathy described was not acceptable. Needle and thread. Yarrow packed into the worst of the shoulder wound and held with pine resin. An old remedy that worked better than it had any right to. Clean water boiled twice on the iron stove. He changed his hands between each task. Fastidious in the way Abernathy had been fastidious, because infection was what killed people who'd survived the anti-initial injury, and infection was preventable if you were careful. It took 2 hours. When he was done, and he sat on the chair that hadn't been used years, and looked at his hands. They were steady. They were always steady when there was work to do. It was the hours after the work that his hands sometimes had opinions about. Then he looked at her bag. He'd gone back for it. 30 minutes in the dark, with Buck at his heel, and the dead cougar still lying where it had fallen, already stiffening in the cold. He'd found the bag 20 feet from where she'd fallen. She must have dropped it when the cougar hit her. Dropped it and kept running, or kept fighting, or both. Heavy. Canvas with leather reinforcement, at the corners and the strap. The kind of bag someone had packed for the long term. Not an afternoon, not a week. Something longer. He looked at it for a long time, then he opened it. He told himself he was looking for something useful. Medical supplies. Identification. Some indication of where she'd come from, or whether there was someone expecting her somewhere who should be told. He found a change of clothing, carefully rolled. A tin of dried meat, mostly full. A small journal with a water-damaged cover. He didn't open it. a folding knife with a worn handle, a compass, a box of matches wrapped in oilcloth, $12 in paper currency, which was not a small amount, and a pistol already loaded. Already cocked and the hammer carefully lowered to half, the position of someone who wanted the weapon ready but not hair-trigger. Someone who knew firearms and carried this one with intention. He set it on the table carefully, and then, underneath a folded cloth at the very bottom of the bag, tucked the way you tuck something you don't want to lose, or something you don't want found, or both, he found the paper. He unfolded it slowly, right at once. Then again. Wanted for questioning in connection with the death of Joseph Whitmore, prospector Clara Whitmore, femina Brooks, 27 years, of age, dark hair, brown eyes, blind, likely use a walking stick, reward, $200. Contact Marshall's office, Brentwick. He looked at the paper, then at the woman on his sleeping platform, then at the paper again, blind. He hadn't known. He'd had no way of knowing, carrying her unconscious through 4 miles of snow. But now that he read the word, things reorganized themselves in his mind. The way her hand had moved when she reached for him on the trail, not searching for his face, not trying to orient herself visually, just reaching for his coat, the grip, the economy of the movement. The way she'd gone absolutely still after she spoke, which he'd attributed to pain or the edge of unconsciousness, but which might have been something else entirely. Listening. Cataloging the space by its sounds and its temperatures, and whatever other information was available to someone who had learned to gather it differently than most people did. She was blind, and someone in a town called Brentwick wanted to find her, had valued finding her at $200, and had described her as someone who would likely be carrying a walking stick. There was no walking stick in the bag. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he folded the paper carefully, put it in his shirt pocket. Not a decision exactly, more the absence of an alternative decision. Put the loaded pistol back in the bag, exactly where he'd found it. Set the bag on the floor beside the sleeping platform, close enough that she could reach it when she woke up, in the place where someone lying on that platform could find it without having to search. He didn't know why he did that last part. He went to the other chair, the one he used, pulled it close to the fire, sat down, waited. She burned for 2 days straight. The first night was the worst. She was in and out. Not truly conscious, but not truly gone either. Caught in the space where the body fights its hardest battles, without any help from the mind. He kept the fire at a steady heat, not too high, the heat that held rather than consumed. Changed the dressings twice. Got water into her by degrees, a little at a time, the way you water something you're afraid of drowning. Buck lay on the floor beside the sleeping platform. Elias hadn't asked him to. The dog had simply decided that was where he should be, and positioned himself accordingly, and stayed there through the night, with the complete commitment of a creature that does not do things by halves. She spoke in her fever, not full sentences. Not anything he could piece into a coherent story, but words came through. Father. That one was clear. Said sometimes with grief, sometimes with something sharper, sometimes with a quality he couldn't name. They took, they said. I saw. And then she would go quiet again, and he would watch her breathe, and count the seconds between each heart. Once, near the end of the second night, she said, "The rock that sleeps." Don't tell them the rock that sleeps. He didn't know what that meant. He wrote it down anyway, on the inside back cover of an old almanac he kept on the shelf. A habit from his years in Kessler Flats, keeping records, because records were evidence of a life being lived. He wasn't sure why he wrote it down now. It felt important in the way that most things feel important at 3 in the morning, when you've been awake for 40 hours and your defenses are thin. On the third day, the fever broke. She slept a real sleep after that. Not fighting anything, just resting. The specific stillness of a body that has finished the battle and is now doing the quieter work of healing. He ate something. First meal in 2 days, hardtack and dried meat, eaten standing at the stove because sitting felt like a luxury he hadn't earned yet. Then he looked out the south window at the snow and thought about Rebecca. He didn't let himself do that often, but sometimes, in moments of sustained exhaustion, his defenses weren't what they should be, and the thoughts came before he could stop them. Rebecca had died in the spring of 1878. Owen 6 weeks after her. A diphtheria outbreak in Kessler Flats. That was what the doctor had called it. The one doctor who'd been available, who'd come too late and left too quickly with an apology that Elias had not been equipped to receive graciously. He'd said things to that doctor, things he was not proud of. He'd said things to a great number of people in the weeks following the burials, and then he'd left. He'd simply left, walked away from Kessler Flats, with a pack and a rifle and Buck at his heels. Buck had been barely a year old then, all oversized paws and earnest attention. A dog who had not yet learned that the world was harder than it first appeared. And he'd gone up into the mountains and stayed. That had been 4 years ago. He had not had reason to second-guess the decision. Until approximately 72 hours ago, he watched the sleeping woman breathe. Don't let yourself, he thought. Don't start. He went outside and split wood until his shoulder ached, until the rhythm of it crowded out the other rhythms in his chest, until the cold air was all there was. On the morning of the 4th day, she spoke clearly for the first time. Someone's watching me. He was at the stove. He turned around, her face was angled toward him. Eyes open, brown, unfocused in the way he now recognized, not looking at him specifically, not looking at anything specifically. Receiving light and the general shape of the room rather than the specific details of it. Her head was tilted slightly. Listening, that would be me, he said. Name's Elias Cord. This is my cabin. A pause. Long. She was doing something with her ears. He could see it in the subtle tilt of her head. The particular stillness that wasn't the stillness of someone waiting, but the stillness of someone gathering. Locating him by the sound of his voice. Locating the stove by its heat. The fire by its sound. The window by the draft. How bad? She asked. The wounds? Yes, Cougar got your left shoulder deep. Your back. 3 separate cuts. Your right thigh. He paused. You'll heal. It'll take time. The shoulder will trouble you longer than the rest. Another pause. She was filing all the information away, processing it with the same economy she seemed to apply to everything. My bag, she said, on the floor to your left. About 2 feet, her hand moved. Found the canvas immediately. No searching, just a direct reach to exactly where it was. Because she'd calculated the distance from where the fire was, and where he'd placed her, and where 2 feet to the left of that had to be. He watched her fingers, check the buckle, the main pocket, work through the interior. She found the pistol. He watched her shoulders ease slightly once she had it in her hand. The specific relaxations of someone who has just confirmed that the thing they were most worried about is still there. She confirmed the load by feel and set it back inside. She didn't thank him for leaving it there. He hadn't expected her to. How far are we from where you found me? She asked. 4 miles south. Which direction does this cabin face? Main door faces north. South window behind you. She was building a map. He understood that now, with the specific clarity of someone watching a skilled thing being done and recognizing the skill for what it was. She was building the cabin in her mind, from the information available. Heat sources, sound sources, air movement, the feel of the platform beneath her, the creak of his weight on the floor when he shifted. My name is Clara Whitmore. She said, I know. Silence. He watched her process that. Watched the implications of it move across her face in sequence. He knows my name. He looked in the bag. He found the paper, and then, what is he going to do with what he found? The bag, she said. Yes, the paper. Yes. Her jaw tightened. Her hand went back to the bag, and then she went very still, the way a person goes still when they're running through options fast, and finding most of them insufficient. When the math of the situation is not working out in their favor, and they need a moment to find the calculation they've missed. Are you going to turn me in? She asked. I haven't yet, he said. She sat with that. So did he. There's broth on the stove, he said finally. You need to eat something. She didn't say anything for a moment, then, all right, and that was how it started. Not with trust. Not with anything so clean as trust. With broth. With the practical acknowledgement that a person who has lost that much blood needs to eat, and that eating requires accepting food from the hand that offers it, at least for now, at least until other options present themselves. He brought up the broth. She accepted it without ceremony. They sat on opposite sides of the cabin's small space, the fire between them, and the warrant sat in his shirt pocket, like a thing that had not yet decided what it was. She didn't tell him everything at once, which he understood. He wouldn't have believed everything at once. And she was a woman who, he was beginning to recognize, understood something fundamental about how trust works. That it's not given, not really, not the kind that holds under pressure. It's built, slowly, with evidence, with the accumulated weight of small things that add up to a pattern a person can stake something on. She started with her father, Joseph Whitmore, prospector for 20 years, spent most of those years in Nevada and Wyoming and the Colorado territories, before moving north in 1876, following a rumor about silver in the Bitterroot Range that turned out to be more rumor than silver. Hard man, she said. Not hard in the mean way. Hard in the way of a man who has been worn down by honest difficulty and come out the other side without bitterness, which was rarer than people acknowledged. Bitterness was the easy response to difficulty. Her father had chosen something harder than bitterness. He'd come to Montana looking for silver. Like most men of his kind in those years, he'd found gold instead. Not a placer deposit, Clara said. She was sitting up by the third day of consciousness, her back against the cabin wall, the bad shoulder still immobile, but the rest of her insisting on being as upright as possible. Not creek gold, a vein, a true vein, deep in the Bitterroot. He called it the whispering lode, a pause, because of the sound the wind made coming through the rock above it. He said it sounded like the mountain was trying to say something it didn't quite have words for. When did he find it? Autumn of 1877. He didn't tell anyone. Not right away. He spent the winter mapping it, assessing it, trying to decide how to move forward. She stopped. Without someone taking it from him, Elias said, yes, but Joseph Whitmore had made a mistake. In the spring of 1878, he'd taken on a business partner. A man named Harlan Decker. Elias kept his face very still. Decker seemed trustworthy. Clara continued. He had money, legitimate money, or money that appeared legitimate, which in those years often amounted to the same thing. He had connections, a trading company in Brentwick, contracts with the railroad, relationships with men who had influence in Helena. My father needed capital to actually work the deposit. He needed equipment and men and supplies and the kind of legal infrastructure that turns a discovery into something you can defend. She paused. He thought Decker was the answer to a practical problem. What happened? Decker had my father killed. Her voice was even. Completely even. The kind of evenness that costs something to maintain, that requires constant, invisible effort to hold in place. March of 1879 made it look like a robbery. 2 of Decker's men did it. I know their names. I know what they look like. I know what the older one said before it happened, and what the younger one said after. I know all of it. She paused. Longer. I know those things because I was there. Elias looked at her. I came to meet my father at the camp, she said. I arrived early. The men didn't know I was coming. I hadn't sent word. I'd just come. The way you do when you're close enough to someone that you don't think about announcing yourself. She stopped. Started again. I was outside the tent when it happened. I heard everything. Every word. Did they see you? Not immediately. The evenness in her voice cracked slightly and then was repaired. Like a wall that shows a fracture and then holds. I ran. I wasn't fast enough. They caught me about a quarter mile from camp. He didn't ask what happened next. He'd seen the scars. Not just the fresh cougar wounds. Those were obvious, recent, still healing. The other ones. The ones on her hands and her forearms that had the particular quality of old deliberate damage. The one along the left side of her face. That most people would miss if they weren't looking with the specific attention of someone who has treated injuries before and knows what they're looking at. They wanted to know what I'd seen, she said, what I knew, whether my father had told me anything about the location of the deposit. They were very thorough about asking. A pause, had he? Elias asked. Yes. Quiet. But not in any way they understood. My father didn't trust paper. He didn't trust maps or coordinates or anything that could be written down and taken from you. He said paper can be stolen. Paper can be copied. Paper can be used as evidence against you in ways you never anticipated. The faintest something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, the memory of one. He told me everything about the whispering lode in stories, since I was small enough to sit on his knee. Stories about a rock that looked like a sleeping bear facing east, a creek that tasted like iron, 3 bent pines that sang in the north wind, a waterfall that never froze, even in the deepest winter, and the cave that waited behind it, a map made of words, Elias said. A map made of senses, she corrected. Things you can feel and smell and hear and taste. Things that can't be drawn on paper because they're not about location, they're about experience. He said, if I could find those things with my body, I would find the gold. Because the body remembers what the mind forgets, and the mind forgets what paper holds. And paper can be taken, she paused. He was right about that last part. And Decker's men didn't understand that. They wanted coordinates, numbers, a map they could hand to a surveyor and have marked on an official claim. A pause. I didn't give them anything. Eventually they decided I didn't know anything useful. She touched the edge of her left eye with 2 fingers. Brief, unconscious, the gesture of someone reaching for something that is no longer there. They left me in the woods and went back to tell Decker I was not a problem. The fire shifted. A log settled. The cabin contracted slightly around the sound of it. Decker had the warrant issued 3 weeks later, she said. Killing my father, he couldn't let that stand open. Someone would eventually ask questions, follow threads. He needed a story. I had motive, opportunity, no alibi, and no credible witnesses to speak for me. Everyone at the camp had been paid or frightened into saying whatever Decker needed them to say. Another pause. A blind woman is very easy to dismiss as unstable, unreliable, possibly violent, possibly not in her right mind. The story wrote itself. Elias said nothing. I've been moving since the spring, she said, staying away from towns, trying to get far enough into the mountains that... She stopped. That what? A long pause, I don't know. She admitted. I think I was trying to reach the whispering lode. I'm not entirely sure what I would have done once I got there. My father's voice keeps leading me, she exhaled. That sounds insane. It doesn't, Elias said. He meant it. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire, thinking about something he hadn't thought about in a specific way in 4 years. Harlan Decker. He said carefully. He operates out of Brentwick? He owns half of Brentwick at this point. Trading company, lumber contracts. He bought up land rights all through this part of Montana over the past several years. Did he ever buy water rights? Land adjacent to a town called Kessler Flats? Clara tilted her head. I don't know that name, it's east of here. Small place. Or it was. Elias looked at his hands. There was a sickness there. Spring of 1878. They called it diphtheria. The doctor called it that, a beet. But the creek that ran through town had been running dark for a year before that. The water tasted wrong. People had been complaining since the autumn of 1877, which was right around the time a new mining outfit started running operations on the ridge above town. Silence Decker's outfit, Clara said. It was not a question. I don't have proof, Elias said. I've never had proof. I never put it together that way. I thought it was sickness. Just sickness. The kind that comes. A pause. But your father found the whispering lode in autumn of 1877. Went looking for a partner in spring of 1878. Found Decker. And Decker was already operating mines in this area, which means he knew this mountain range. He knew what was in it. He knew there was gold here before your father ever came to him. Which means, Clara said slowly, he didn't take my father on as a partner to help him. He took him on to get access to the location. And once he had enough information to work from, he didn't need my father anymore. The fire spoke for both of them for a while. Elias thought about Rebecca, about Owen, about the doctor who'd come too late, about a creek that had run dark for a year while people drank from it and sickened, and some of them died, because the operation on the ridge above town had put something into the water that had no business being there. He reached into his shirt pocket, took out the warrant, set it on the table between them. "I'm not turning you in," he said. She didn't look relieved. She looked wary, the wariness of someone who has been given good news before and has learned that good news often has a cost that comes later, which he respected more than relief would have earned. "Why not?" she asked. He thought about that, honestly, because the paper says one thing, he said finally, and everything else says something different. He got up to put more wood on the fire. She didn't say anything else for a long time, but she ate the soup he brought her, all of it, which was, he decided, its own kind of answer. She was on her feet by the 5th day, not steadily, not without cost. He could see it in the set of her jaw every time she moved her left shoulder, the slight catch in her breath that she controlled by sheer will and released only when she thought he wasn't paying attention. But she was up. That was the thing about Clara Whitmore that Elias was beginning to understand. The woman had a completely different relationship with the word enough than most people he'd encountered. Most people, when they'd been through what she'd been through in the past week, would still be horizontal. She was standing at his south window, both hands on the sill, face turned toward the cold glass. "What's out there?" she asked Snow. "Pines. The meadow slopes down to the southeast. There's a deer trail at the far edge. You can see if the light's right. What color is the sky?" He looked. "Gray-white, high clouds. No storm in them," she nodded slowly. Her fingers moved on the sill, reading the texture of it, the temperature variations in the wood, the slight give where the chinking between logs had settled. "There's a knot in this board," she said. "About 3 inches from my right hand. Old. The wood's cooler around it. Different density." He looked. "There is. The south window gets more light than the east one. I can feel the difference in the glass temperature." "It does." She turned around, found her way to the table without touching anything, using the warmth of the fire to orient herself relative to the fireplace, calculating the distance to the chair from there, committing to each step with the precision of someone who has learned that being approximately right has consequences. "I can help," she said. "While I'm here." He was at the stove. "You're healing. I'm not broken." She said it without heat, without defensiveness, just as a statement of fact, offered in the same tone you'd use to say the sky was gray. "Tell me what needs doing." He looked at her for a moment. "Trapline needs resetting. Snow warped some of the trigger mechanisms on the number 4s. Bring them inside. I'll fix them." "You can't. The mechanism on a number 4, new house trap, has 17 components," she said. "I can feel each one and tell you which one is wrong. Bring them in." He brought them in. He watched her hands move over the first trap and made a genuine effort to be unimpressed and failed completely. Her fingers moved with a surety that had nothing to do with sight. A different kind of knowing, more immediate, more tactile. The knowledge that lives in the hands rather than the eyes. She found the fault in the trigger mechanism in less than 30 seconds. A bent tension rod, slightly off angle, that he probably would have missed himself until the trap failed, on a bad morning with something valuable in it. "You've done this before," he said. "My father taught me." He said, "A person who understands. The work never has to rely on someone else's word about whether it's been done right." She moved to the second trap. "There's sage in your herb collection that's gone dry. The smell's wrong. Too brittle. You won't get the medicinal benefit." He looked at the wall where he kept his herbs. "The bundle on the left, yes, discard it. The one beside it is still good." A pause. Fingers moving on the second trap. "And there's a draft in your north wall. Low, maybe 8 inches from the floor. You're losing heat." He found the draft. A gap in the chinking that he'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. She reset the third trap. Set it down with the quiet precision of someone putting a tool back exactly where it belongs. "Thank you," she said. He thought at first she meant the traps. Then he realized she meant something larger. The bag left where she could reach it, the warrant kept rather than surrendered. The questions not asked about things he'd seen in the scars on her arms. He didn't ask her to be more specific. He didn't want to make her name it plainly. Some things lose something when they're made too explicit. He thought about saying "you're welcome" and said "incident" instead, which felt more accurate. It was 3 days later, the evening of the 8th day since he'd brought her in, when he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He was describing a sunset. It had happened without planning. They were sitting, she near the south window, and he in his usual chair, and the light had shifted into something remarkable, the way it does sometimes in October over these mountains. The dying sun, pulling gold and deep, rose out of the clouds, and laying it across the snow, so the whole meadow appeared lit from underneath, as if the light had a source below the surface as well as above it. He'd looked at it, and then, without really deciding to, "The sky's doing something." Clara turned her head toward the glass. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He was bad at it at first. Gold, pink, the clouds. Flat words that didn't earn what they were trying to describe. But she kept asking questions. Where exactly? What shape? Is it sharp or soft at the edges? Does the gold go all the way to the tree line, or does it stop? And he found himself reaching for language he hadn't used since the years when he'd had someone to talk to. Since Rebecca, who had loved the way light moved on things, and who had always wanted him to describe it to her when his view was better than hers. He'd been better at it then. He was reaching for a skill that had gone unused for 4 years, and finding that it was still there, a little stiff, a little reluctant, but there. He talked about the sunset for 6 minutes. He knew it was 6 minutes, because after he stopped, Clara said, "That's the longest you've spoken since I arrived." He thought about denying it. "Probably," he said instead. She was quiet for a moment. Then something changed in her face. Small, around the corners of her mouth. The kind of change that is not decided on, that happens before the deciding part of the brain gets involved. A real smile. The involuntary kind. The kind that escapes before a person can determine whether they want to show it. Ilias looked back out the window. But he was aware of it, very aware. The way you become aware of warmth after a period of cold. Not a dramatic awareness, just a noticing. A registering of something present that hadn't been present before. He was also aware, in the part of his mind where he kept things he wasn't ready to think about directly, that the warrant was still in his shirt pocket. That it listed $200. That a man in Brentwick who had possibly been responsible for the deaths of everyone Elias had ever loved was currently operating with complete freedom, while Clara Whitmore healed from cougar wounds in a mountain cabin. And he sat here describing sunsets. $200 was a significant sum. He was aware of that too, but he left the warrant in his pocket, and he kept talking about the sky until the light failed, and the mountains went gray and the first stars appeared over the eastern ridge. Faint at first, and then brighter as the dark came fully in. On the 10th day, she said, "My father's map. It starts northeast of here. About 6 miles, I think, based on where I was when the cougar found me." 6 miles into the Bitterroot, he said. "Yes. In winter, yes." He thought about that. "The passes will be open for maybe another 3 weeks. After that, nothing gets through until March. I know, you were alone out there, with no gear for extended travel. You weren't going to make it much further." "I know that too," she said. "I knew it when I left the last settlement. I decided to go anyway." She paused. "Some things are worth trying even if you don't expect to survive the trying. That's not. I know what you're going to say. I've heard it before. From people who meant well and people who didn't." She turned her face toward him. Not quite meeting his eyes. Not quite. Because she couldn't, but close enough to be unsettling, in a way he couldn't immediately account for. "I'm not asking you to go with me. I didn't say you were. You have that tone." "What tone?" "The tone of someone who's about to offer help and is already resentful of the obligation." He opened his mouth, closed it because that was, honestly, not inaccurate. Or it had been not inaccurate 60 seconds ago. He wasn't entirely sure anymore. "Tell me the map," he said. A pause. Why? Because I know this range. I've run trap lines through most of the upper Bitterroot. If your father's landmarks are real, I might recognize them. A longer pause. The kind of pause where something is actually being decided. The rock that looks like a sleeping bear, she said finally, facing east. At the base of a north-facing slope, he thought. There's a formation like that. Bear Rock. Some of the old trappers called it. Northeast of here, maybe 7 miles. Her breath changed. Just slightly. The held quality of someone receiving news they needed. A creek nearby, she said, tasting of iron. The mineral springs run through that whole area. Iron contents high. You'd taste it in every creek for 2 miles in any direction. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, very softly. He wasn't lying to me, no, Elias said. He wasn't. She turned her face back toward the south window. He watched something move through her, something large and quiet, like a tide coming in rather than a wave. Grief, maybe, or relief, or the complicated thing that happens when a truth you've believed alone for a long time is confirmed by another person. When the thing you've been holding starts to have weight outside your own hands, he didn't speak into it. He'd learned something in 4 years of solitude. The value of letting silence do the work that silence is equipped for. That night he sat alone by the fire after she slept. He thought about Joseph Whitmore, who had mapped a fortune in his daughter's memory, with stories about sleeping rocks and iron water and trees that sang. Who had understood that the safest vault in the world was the mind of a child he trusted. And who had been right, he thought about Harlan Decker, comfortable. In Brentwick, untouchable, with 4 years of unpunished decisions behind him and no reason to expect the accounting was coming. He thought about Rebecca, about Owen, about a creek that had run dark. He thought about the warrant in his pocket. He looked at Buck. Buck looked back at him with the expression of a dog, who had already made up his mind and was waiting with patient canine confidence for the human to catch up all up. All right, Elias said. He got up, banked the fire, pulled out the old almanac and looked at what he'd written in the fever dark. The rock that sleeps. Don't tell them the rock that sleeps. She'd been protecting it even then. Even unconscious. Even burning. He closed the almanac. Put it back on the shelf. Went to bed. Didn't sleep. Which was normal. In the morning he put coffee on and waited for the sound of her waking. She came to the table. He poured the coffee. Set it where she could reach it. Without announcement, without ceremony, without the performance of helpfulness that she'd made. Clear she didn't want. I know the country between here and Bear Rock, he said. I know the route through the upper Bitterroot. I've got enough provisions for a month if we're careful. Silence, the warrant doesn't mean anything out here. And if we find what your father left, you'll have something to take back. Something real. Still nothing. I'm not doing it for the gold. I know, she said. Do you? You've had the warrant for 10 days, she said. $200 would have been useful. You didn't use it, he sat with that. Why are you doing it? She asked. He could have given her a clean answer. Several were available, but clean answers were incomplete answers, and she would know that. Because your father gave you a map, made of things that can't be stolen, he said. And I want to know if it leads somewhere real. Clara turned her face toward the east window where the morning light was coming in pale and cold. 3 bent pines, she said quietly. That sound like a flute when the north wind blows. I know where they are, he said. She nodded once. Then we go, she said. Buck's tail hit the floor 3 times. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Nothing like a flute, not yet. Just the cold voice of the mountain, which had been speaking this whole time. And for the first time in 4 years, Elias Cord listened. The storm came on a Thursday. Elias knew it was Thursday because he kept a tally on the cabin wall. A small mark for each day. Not for any practical reason. There was nothing in these mountains that cared what day it was. Just because he'd learned in 4 years alone that a man who stops counting days loses something harder to name. Something to do with being a person rather than just a thing moving through seasons. The storm hit hard after dark. Wind first, then snow. Not the quiet kind that makes the world look clean and generous, but horizontal snow, aggressive snow, the kind that finds every gap in every wall and every seam in every coat, and reminds you that the mountain tolerates you at its pleasure. Clara sat close to the fire. She'd pulled her knees up and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and was doing the thing he'd noticed she did when she was thinking, her right hand moving slowly across whatever surface was near. Tonight, it was the rough wood of the chair arm, back and forth, reading something that wasn't there, or reading the texture of what was. He'd been watching her for 10 minutes, which was fine. He was just sitting. "You're staring," she said. "I'm not staring. I'm sitting. You're sitting very loudly." He looked at the fire instead. Outside, the wind threw itself against the south wall with a sound like something personal. Like the mountain had a specific grievance it needed to make known right now. "Tell me the rest of it," he said. She knew what he meant. She'd told him pieces: the Bear Rock, the Iron Creek, the 3 singing pines. But she'd stopped there, held something back. He'd let her hold it for days. But they were leaving in 3 days, if the storm cleared, and he needed the whole shape of the thing before they walked into the mountain. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she started. "After the 3 pines, you go north. There's a ridge. My father called it the Cold Shoulder. He said it's the only place in that stretch of mountain where the wind comes from the east instead of the north. You know you're on the right ridge when the wind hits your right cheek instead of your face." Elias thought. "There's a ridge like that. About 2 miles past the pine stand, past the ridge, the ground drops. A canyon. Narrow, my father said 2 horses couldn't walk it side by side. I've been in it. Once. Didn't go deep. At the far end there's a waterfall." She paused. "Small. Not dramatic." He said it sounds like a woman humming to herself, and it doesn't freeze. He straightened slightly, because he'd heard of that. From Abernathy. Years ago. Old trapper talk about a geothermal seep, somewhere in the upper Bitterroot, water running warm from deep rock, a falls that stayed liquid even in February. He'd always assumed it was one of those mountain legends that gets better with each telling. "The cave is behind the falls," Clara said. "You have to step through the water to reach it. Just 1 step. Cold enough to make you gasp, shallow enough not to take you down." She stopped. He found the vein in the back of the cave, quartz hosted. Thick enough to see the color in lamplight. Ilias stared at the fire. "He described the color to me," she said quietly. "He said, and he knew how it sounded. He said it looked like the last light of day trapped in stone." Silence. "When did he tell you all this?" Elias asked. "My whole life. He used to put me to bed with stories when I was small. Other fathers told fairy tales. My father told me about the mountain." Something shifted in her voice. "Not grief exactly, but the place grief comes from. The bedrock under it. He said it was the best thing he'd ever found, and it needed to live in someone's memory until it was time to find it again. A man who hid his fortune in his daughter's dreams. Who decided the safest vault in the world was the mind of a child he trusted completely. And then they took your sight," Elias said, "and they thought they'd taken the map with it. They thought a blind woman couldn't navigate, couldn't find her way. Through 40 miles of mountain terrain in October." A pause. "They were wrong about a great many things," he almost smiled. "Didn't quite make it, Decker," he said. "You called his name in your fever, did I? More than once." She was quiet. "He was charming," she said finally. "That's the thing I keep returning to. I met him twice before my father was killed. He seemed kind. Interested. He brought my father whiskey and called him Joe and laughed at his jokes. A beat. I thought my father had finally found an honest partner. Men who are good at the surface," Elias said. "They're the ones to be careful of." "Yes," she shifted, winced. The shoulder still had an opinion about movement. "Do you believe me? About the map?" He'd believed her for a while now. But he understood why she needed to hear it said directly. "Yes," he said. She exhaled. "Small, I've told this story 4 times," she said. "To 4 different people since my father died. 3 of them told me to let it go. The 4th one went to Decker directly. Sold me out for $7 and a promise. $7. He didn't say anything to that. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be hollow. I'm not letting it go, she said. No, Elias agreed. We're going to find it. You're doing this for the vein, she said. Not accusatory. Just testing. I'm doing this so Decker answers for what he did to your father, and possibly to mine, to my family. If the water was poisoned, if it was his operation, then this goes back further than Joseph Whitmore's death. And I need to know. She turned toward him. Not quite his eyes, but close. That's not a clean reason, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't good, she said. I don't trust clean reasons outside. The storm made its argument to the mountain. The mountain did not seem particularly moved by it. Inside, the fire burned. And somewhere in the space between two people and a fire on a storm night, something that had been building for 10 days settled into a new shape. Not named, not spoken about, just present. They left on a Saturday. 3 days after the storm cleared, the world was brilliant and white and brutal, cold enough that breathing required actual thought. That moment of deliberation before each inhale, acknowledging that the air was going to be sharp and taking it anyway. The kind of cold that Montana produces without apology in November. The kind that gets into everything and decides to stay. Elias packed for 2 weeks. Provisions, medicinal supplies, extra ammunition. He hoped he wouldn't need it, but he was not going to plan for the most optimistic version of events. That was how you ended up dead in a canyon with a surprised look on your face. 2 wool blankets, the bearskin for the worst nights. Enough dried meat and hardtack to feel heavy on his back and necessary in his chest. Clara packed her own bag. He didn't offer to do it for her. She'd said on the second day of her recovery, in a tone that was not angry but was very clear, I will tell you when I need help. Until I tell you, assume I don't. He'd taken that seriously. There was something tiring about the performance of helpfulness when it wasn't wanted. He was relieved to be exempted from it. They stood outside the cabin in the early light. Buck was already 20 yards up the slope, turning back to look at them with the expression of a dog who had places to be and was unclear on what was taking everyone so long. Clara had her gait down now, the gait she used in terrain she didn't know yet. Slightly slower, more deliberate. Her weight settling into each step before committing to the next. Gathering information from the ground through the soles of her feet, her stick in her left hand, the injured shoulder on the right side now bearing a pack she'd insisted on carrying herself. She held her spine straight. No apology in her posture. None at all. Ready, she said. There's a rise in the first 100 yards, he said. Then it levels. I can hear the slope. She tilted her head slightly. Winds from the left. That puts us on the south face. Correct. She started moving. He fell into step beside her. Not ahead, she didn't need a guide and had not asked for one. Not behind. That would be surveillance. Beside, which felt like the right place to be. They'd been walking maybe 40 minutes when Buck stopped, stiffened. Elias stopped too. What is it? Clara asked immediately. She'd heard the change in the dog's movement in the snow, the sudden silence where there had been soft footfalls, and she'd understood it. Buck's got something. He scanned the tree line, the slope above, the trail behind, nothing moving. But the dog was locked on the direction they'd come from, nose working hard, every line of his body pointed. Elias moved back down the trail, 20 yards. Angled off the path and crouched, horse tracks, 3 sets. Not old, the snow at the edge of each print was still sharp, still crisp. 6 hours, maybe. Middle of the night, someone had circled the cabin after dark. While they slept, he stood slowly, looked around with different eyes. The eyes of a man who has just realized he is potentially the thing being hunted rather than the hunter. He went back to Clara. Tracks, he said quietly. 3 horses. Last night she was still. How far? Edge of the meadow. Came around the south side, cut north along the tree line, a pause. They knew we were there, she said. Yes, didn't come in, no. Which means they were waiting, or they wanted to see which direction we'd go this morning. Elias looked at the tree line. We go the long way, he said. How long is the long way? Adds a day and a half. She considered this for exactly as long as it needed considering. Then we add a day and a half. She said it the way you say something that is simply true and does not require grief or complaint or the lengthy process of coming to terms with it. He found himself grateful for that. Some people needed to spend time with a complication before they could move through it. Clara Whitmore was not that kind of person. They changed direction. Buck moved, watching their rear, the long way it was. They found the Pruitt place by smell, wood smoke first. Then, underneath it, the smell of livestock, horses and a milk cow. The warm animal smell, that means people are attempting to make something permanent, in a place that resists permanence. The smell of effort, of people who have decided to stay. Settlement, Clara said. She'd identified it before he'd even processed what he was smelling. Her nose was faster than his. He'd noticed that in the cabin, too. She'd cataloged his herb collection by smell before he'd thought to tell her where it was, small homestead. I've passed it before. Never stopped. Are they safe? I don't know them well enough to say. A pause in their walking. But you're considering it, she said. We're a day and a half off schedule. Temperature's dropping. If it hits what it did last February, then we stop, she said. Assess from the inside. The Pruitt homestead was 2 buildings, main cabin and a small barn, set in a south-facing clearing that had been worked with real intention. The garden was put to bed, the rows visible under the snow as low ridges. The wood pile was serious. Someone here understood winter. A man came out of the barn before they reached the door, medium height. 45, maybe. The posture of someone who has been doing physical labor his entire life and wears it in his shoulders. He looked at Elias, then at Clara, then at Buck, then back at Elias. A man running a calculation. Walt Pruitt, Elias said. We need to stop for the night. We'll pay. Pruitt looked at them for a long moment. He was looking at Clara in a specific way. Not threatening. Something more complicated than that. Something that had recognition in it. And underneath the recognition, like water under ice. Moving but not visible, unless you knew to look. Something that looked like shame. Come in, Pruitt said. Inside? A woman, Meg Pruitt, introduced quickly by her husband, with the brevity of a man who needs his hands free to deal with whatever is about to happen, was managing 3 children in the pre-supper chaos. A girl of maybe 8, 2 boys younger. The smallest was crying with the sustained, exhausted commitment of someone who has been at it for a while. Clara crouched down, without hesitation, without the moment of assessment that most adults would take before approaching an unknown crying child. She moved toward the sound with the instinct of someone who understands distress, the way some people understand weather. Not something to analyze, but something to respond to. The boy stopped mid-wail, stared at her. She was already talking, quietly. Not baby talk, actual talk, the kind that children sometimes receive with more attention than adults give them credit for, sensing that they're being taken seriously. Her hands moved to illustrate something. The boy listened, with the wide, suspended attention of someone encountering something they don't understand but feel is important. Elias watched from across the room. So did Walt Pruitt, Meg Pruitt said, to the room in general. That's the first time he stopped without being picked up in 2 days. He's teething. The girl of 8 came and sat on the floor, beside Clara without being invited, as if she'd been waiting for the right person to appear, and here that person was. Within 7 minutes, all 3 children were gathered around Clara while she described the sounds of the mountain in November. Not telling them it was frightening. Not telling them it was beautiful. Telling them the truth, that it was both, and that you learned to tell the difference by listening carefully and without deciding in advance what you expected to hear. Elias looked at Pruitt. Pruitt was not watching his children. He was watching Clara's face with that expression, the one with the recognition in it, and the shame that moved like water under ice. Dinner was quiet. After the children were put to bed, Meg Pruitt excused herself with the tact of a woman who understood that whatever was about to happen was not for her to witness. 3 people at the table, the lamp between them. Walt Pruitt put his hands flat on the table, looked at them. Then he said, without preamble, I know who you are, Miss Whitmore. Clara didn't move, do you? She said. I was in Brentwick in the spring of '79. His jaw worked. The motion of a man chewing on something he's been chewing on for years and has never managed to swallow or spit out. I had a freighting contract, Decker's company. He asked several of us, to sign a document. Said it was a witness statement. Said it would. Make things simple, Clara said. Yes, he told you I'd killed my father. He said the evidence was clear. He said you'd been. Pruitt stopped. Unwell, Clara said. Unstable. That's usually the word. Pruitt's hands were very still on the table. I signed it. I didn't ask enough questions. I had 3 years of work at stake. And he had. I know what he had, Clara said. Not loudly. Not with anger. Just with the specificity of someone who has cataloged exactly what Harlan Decker had and what he was willing to do with it. A silence. Last spring. Pruitt said, 2 of his men came here, wanted us to inform on travelers passing through. Pay for information about a blind woman. He glanced toward the back room where his children were sleeping. We told them nothing. Because you'd seen enough, Clara said. Because I'd seen enough, he agreed. And because, he stopped, my youngest. Martha, she was born without. She can't hear well. Left ear completely. The right one partial. He looked at his hands. People have treated her like she's less, Clara said. Yes. Silence. Elias had been watching this whole exchange the way you watch something whose full dimensions you can feel but can't yet entirely see. He understood now, the shape of it. The way Clara's presence in this kitchen had reorganized something in Walt Pruitt that had needed reorganizing for 3 years. I want to ask you something, Clara said. Think about whether you can do it before you agree. Ask, write down what you know. All of it. That you signed the statement, that Decker asked you, what he told you, and what he left out. Sign it, date it. Give it to Elias to keep. Pruitt looked at Elias. What does he do with it? Nothing yet, Elias said. Safekeeping, and then someone answers for what happened to my father, Clara said. Pruitt was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the lamp guttered once and steadied. I'll write it tonight, he said. Clara nodded once. Thank you, she said. Then, and this was the thing Elias would think about later, in the hours he didn't sleep through, she said. She fought. I know it took something to say this. I know it's been sitting heavy for 3 years. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter that you signed the paper. A pause. But it matters more that you're saying the truth now. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment, then he got up and found paper and a pen, and he wrote. The second day out from the Pruitt homestead, moving northeast. The terrain shifting as it always did on the approach to Circeus mountain country. The wide meadows giving way to steeper country. The trees pressing closer together. The silence thickening in the way mountain silence does, when it has something specific to say. Buck found it first. He slowed without stopping. Not the alertness of a threat, just the registration of a presence that needed thinking about. The way a dog looks, when it's adding something to its understanding of the world and hasn't yet decided what to do with the addition. Elias registered it 2 minutes later. Someone was paralleling them, moving through the trees 40 yards upslope. Keeping exact pace, adjusting when they adjusted, not closing the distance, not increasing it. Just maintaining it, the way someone maintains something they've decided to maintain. One person. Traveling light. Moving with the ease of someone who belongs in this terrain. Moving the way Elias moved, which meant someone who had put real time into these mountains. Not a hired hand from somewhere flatter. Someone who knew this country. Elias kept his pace. Said nothing. Let another 100 yards go by. There's someone in the trees, Clara said. I know. How long? 10 minutes, not running us down, she said. Pacing us. Yes. Then they want something other than the obvious, which was accurate. If you wanted to kill 2 people in open mountain country, with elevation and surprise on your side, you did not spend 10 minutes walking beside them. You took the shot, or you decided against it and went home. Elias stopped, called out loud enough to carry through the pines. Either come in or go around. Stop following silence. Then movement, coming downslope. Not fast, not aggressive. The movement of someone who's been waiting for the invitation and is now accepting it. A man came out of the tree line, 40 maybe. Trail lean in the specific way that means months in the mountains, not weeks. Dark coat. Rifle slung across his back, deliberately slung. A statement about intent. He stopped at 15 feet. He looked at Elias. Elias looked at him. And the world did something strange. Rearranged itself into a shape that didn't quite fit the shape the world had been a moment before. The way a room looks when you return to it after years. And the furniture has changed and hasn't changed simultaneously, and your body has to reconcile what it remembers with what it sees. Elias, the man said, one word, and in one word, in the specific timbre and rhythm of the voice. The voice of someone Elias had last heard in 1874, in Wyoming, in a fight that had gone badly fast and ended with Elias, on his horse riding north and his brother going down in the chaos and not getting back up. And the next day when Elias went back, no body, no tracks. Just the particular silence of a place where something has happened, and the participants have gone. Seth Elias said, his brother, not dead, Seth Cord. 35 years old now. He'd have been 27 in Wyoming. Young enough to still carry that quality of invincibility that young men carry before the world makes its corrections. He didn't carry it now. What he carried instead was the quality of a man who has made choices he understands. The full weight of Clara had gone completely still. Listening with her whole body. You're working for Decker, Elias said. Not a question. Seth's jaw moved. Yes. Since when? 76? 2 years after Wyoming. 2 years during which Elias had believed his brother was dead and had carried that belief. And all it meant through every day that followed, there were things he wanted to say. Loud things. Things that would have required his hands. The specific anger of a man who has grieved someone who turned out not to need grieving, who has spent 8 years carrying a loss that was partially invented. He didn't, because Seth was already talking, with the urgency of someone who has calculated exactly how much time he has and is spending it carefully. I can't stay. Decker's other tracker, Rourke, former Army, brought in 3 weeks ago specifically for this. If he finds out I came to you, He stopped, glanced upslope behind him. A habit. The reflex of a man who checks his surroundings as a matter of professional survival. Rourke has 5 men. They've been holding back, waiting for confirmation you're heading for the upper Bitterroot. They won't hold much longer. Why are you telling us this? Clara said. Her voice was even. Not hostile. Not warm. Seth looked at her fully for the first time. Something moved across his face that Elias couldn't entirely read. Something that had elements of recognition in it, though he couldn't have known her before this moment. Because I've been doing this work for 8 years, Seth said. And in 8 years I've told myself many things about what kind of work it is. A pause. And then I learned the full story of what Decker did to her. Not his version. The actual version. He paused again. I have a line. I found it. After 8 years, Clara said, yes, the line was here, she said. Not before, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Tell us where Rourke is holding, she said. Seth looked at Elias. She's the one asking, Elias said. Seth told them. 2 days behind, holding at a creek crossing to the southwest, while they waited for confirmation of direction. Rourke knew the rough destination. Not the specific location, he'll figure it out, Seth said. He's good. Then give us something he doesn't have, Clara said. North Ridge Pass. East of the canyon you're heading for, narrow. Doesn't appear on any maps being made now. Takes 2 days off the approach but requires technical climbing. He looked at Elias. You can do it. He looked at Clara. I don't know if I can do it, Clara said. Seth looked at her. The footing is. I said I can do it. Seth closed his mouth. Then he said to Elias, Creek at the top of the pass has quartz in the bed. The water sounds different there. Clicks instead of runs. He looked at Clara. You'll hear it. She nodded once. Seth looked at his brother. 8 years of silence sat between them. Enough silence for a long argument, for accusations, for grief and counter-grief. There wasn't time for any of it. I'll give you 2 days if I can, Seth said. I don't know if I can. He turned to go. Seth, Elias said. His brother stopped. Didn't turn. The creek above Kessler Flats, Elias said. In 77. 78.
Was that Decker's operation that poisoned it?
4 seconds of silence. Yes, Seth said. He walked back into the trees. And then he was gone, the way people who truly know mountains go. The mountain simply absorbed him back. Ilya stood in the trail. Clara stood beside him. He was shaking. She said quietly. Yes, the whole time. I could hear it. A pause. He's afraid. Seth doesn't scare easily, which means he's very afraid. She turned her face toward the tree line, where Seth had disappeared. He came anyway. Elias looked at the empty pines for a long moment. Yes, he said. He did. They took the North Pass. 2 days of climbing that required more from both of them than Elias would have acknowledged ahead of time. The footing was exactly what Seth had described. Narrow, technical, unforgiving. The kind of terrain that punishes inattention with the specific impersonality of physics. Clara did not lose attention. She climbed with her hands as much as her feet, reading the rock before she committed weight to it, asking Elias questions that were not requests for help, but requests for information. What angle is the next step? How wide is the ledge? Is the ice on the left or right of the hold? He answered accurately and without embellishment. She moved. They made progress. He helped her once, just once, a section where the path narrowed to 14 inches above a drop that neither of them discussed aloud. He took her hand and guided it to the hold on the wall. She gripped it, moved across, didn't release his hand until she was clear on the other side. Then she let go and kept moving. He stood there for a second, his hand remembering the weight of hers, the specific quality of her grip. Not desperate, not tentative. Exactly as much pressure as the situation required. Don't, he told himself. This is not the time. He kept climbing. They found the creek at the top of the pass, exactly as Seth had said. The quartz in the bed. The sound of it. Not the liquid run of ordinary mountain water, but something percussive. Clicking. Like the mountain was working something out in its own private language. There it is, Clara said. Before he pointed it out. There it is, he agreed. They camped in a shallow cave on the lee side of the pass. Not comfortable. The rock was cold and the space was cramped, and the wind made its usual argument outside. But sheltered. He built a fire from dry wood he'd carried up specifically for this. He knew what open rock above the tree line offered in the way of fuel. The fire was small. But it was enough. Clara sat close to it, hands extended toward the heat, reading it the way she read everything, the way it moved, the way it changed, what it could tell her about the space around it. He sat across. Neither of them spoke for a long time. He'd noticed that about her. That she was comfortable in silence, the way people are comfortable in a language they've spoken long enough to stop translating in their heads. She didn't fill silence because she was uneasy in it. She let it be what it was. He'd spent 4 years alone and had learned something similar. But her version was quieter, somehow, more settled in itself. Tell me about her, Clara said. He didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Rebecca, he said. Yes, he looked at the fire. He hadn't said her name to another person in 4 years. Had said it to the empty cabin sometimes, in the early mornings, when the light came in wrong, and he forgot, for a fraction of a second, that the world was what it currently was. But not to a person. Not out loud in the presence of another human being who would hear it and hold it. She laughed easily, he said. That was the first thing. I was not a man who caused a lot of laughter, but she laughed at things I said. Not because they were particularly funny. Because she wanted to. A pause. I learned later that's what she did. She gave people the gift of their own humor. Made you feel wittier than you were. Clara said nothing. Just listened with the complete attention she brought to everything. Owen was 4 when he died. He stopped. The words were in his chest like stones he'd been carrying for 4 years without setting them down. He was starting to be interesting. That sounds terrible, but children get interesting at a certain age. He was starting to ask the questions that don't have good answers, Clara said. Yes, a silence. My mother died when I was 7, Clara said. My father and I had 16 years together after she died. Before he was killed, she paused. I've spent a great deal of time calculating whether that was enough. Whether I should feel grateful for the 16 years rather than. You're allowed to feel both, Elias said. She was quiet for a moment. You're allowed to, too, she said. He looked at the fire. She'd be 41 now, he thought. Rebecca. She'd have gray starting at the temples. She always said she'd go gray early, her mother had. He'd never gotten to see that. He'd never gotten to see what 41 looked like on her face. He realized he was gripping the edge of his boot, loosened his hand. Clara's hand moved in the firelight. Slowly, until it found his wrist. Rested there, light. The way you rest your fingers on something to check whether it's warm. Not grasping, just present. He didn't move. She didn't say anything, and neither did he. The fire burned. Outside, the wind moved through the top of the pass with a sound like the world mourning. Something it had lost long enough ago that it no longer remembered what, exactly. Only that something was gone. Only that the mourning continued regardless. After a while, he turned his hand over. Not dramatically. Just slowly, so that her hand was in his palm rather than on his wrist. She let it stay there. Well, he thought. Well, he did not sleep that night. But it was a different kind of not sleeping. Not the punishing kind. Not the accounting of loss kind. Just wakefulness. The ordinary, almost pleasant wakefulness of a man who is thinking about something other than grief for the first time in a long while. Which was something? It was something. In the morning they climbed down from the pass. The air was colder. The sky was the particular shade of high blue that means the temperature will drop before it rises. Buck moved ahead, tail up. One more day, Elias said. Maybe less. Clara walked beside him. Her gait had changed over the past weeks. The mountain was in her now, in the way her feet read the ground, in the economy of her movement. She'd taken the terrain in the way she took everything. Completely, through every available sense, until it was part of her. What do you think you'll feel? She asked. When we get there, I don't know. I've been trying not to think too far ahead. Why? Because when I've planned too far ahead, things have. He paused. Changed, she said. In ways that made the plan irrelevant. Yes, she nodded. My father used to say the mountain doesn't care what you planned. It only cares what you do when the plan stops working. What do you think you'll feel? He asked. A long pause. Like he was right, she said. Like he told me something true, and I carried it, and it was real, and he was real, and he didn't just... She stopped. Disappear without leaving anything behind. 3 years of her father's voice in her memory. A dead man's stories lighting the way through 40 miles of mountain. The best gift, Elias thought, is the one that keeps working after you're gone. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. They walked. The mountain received them. And ahead, 2 days distant and 3 years in the making. Something waited behind a waterfall that didn't freeze. Something trapped in quartz like the last light of day. Something Joseph Whitmore had hidden in his daughter's heart and trusted would find its way home. Still there. Still waiting. They heard the waterfall before they saw it. Which was how Joseph Whitmore had said it would be. Clara stopped the moment the sound reached her. Stopped completely. One hand on her walking stick, the other hanging at her side, her head tilted at the angle she used, when she was receiving something with her full attention. Elias stopped too, because her stopping had a quality to it. The quality of something significant happening inside a person that you don't want to interrupt. She was listening. The sound was exactly what it was supposed to be. Not dramatic, not the thunder of a falls in spring melt. Something smaller, lower. A continuous sound that did, in fact, have the quality of a woman humming to herself, as if someone were in a room nearby, unaware they were being heard. Low and constant and oddly warm for water falling onto cold rock. That's it, Clara said. Very quiet. That's it, Elias confirmed. He looked at the canyon around them. Narrow. 2 horses couldn't have walked it side by side. The walls were close enough that he could nearly touch both sides simultaneously, and the rock was gray-black and layered in the way of very old geology, shot through with quartz veins that caught the thin afternoon light and bent it into something else. Beautiful. He hadn't expected to find something beautiful at the end of this. Buck was already at the waterfall. turned back to look at them with the particular stillness of a dog who understands that this is not a situation for enthusiasm. They moved forward. The canyon opened slightly at its end, a small oval space, maybe 30 feet across, the walls curving back to receive the falls. The water came down a 15-foot drop, thin, silver, constant, and it steamed, geothermal. Just as the old trapper stories had said, the rock behind the falls was dark with perpetual moisture. And there, if you knew to look, if you had eyes that knew what to look for, you could see it. The suggestion of space behind the water. A gap, a cave mouth. Deep enough that the falls concealed it completely from anyone who didn't already know it existed. My father stepped through on the left side, Clara said. He said the water is thinner there. Elias looked. The left edge of the falls had a narrow gap where the flow thinned to a curtain maybe 18 inches wide. Still cold, still wet, but passable. I'll go first, he said. Together, she said. He looked at her. She was already moving toward the water. On 3. He said, just go, she said. So they went, one step through the water. Cold enough to stop thought. Cold enough to make the body register the crossing as significant, as a threshold between one state and another. He took Clara's arm as they stepped through, not because she needed steadying, but because the floor on the other side was uneven, and he knew what was there, and she didn't, not yet, not with her hands. They came through into the cave. The sound of the falls changed immediately, contained now, bouncing off rock, filling the space with that low hum multiplied back on itself. He got the lamp lit. The light went out in all directions at once, and the walls gave it back gold. Not everywhere, not coating every surface. But there at the back wall of the cave, visible even in the lamp's modest reach, the quartz vein ran thick and wide, and through it, woven through it the way something precious gets woven into the ordinary substance of the world in weights. The color that had no right to be this far from the sun. He'd seen gold before. Placer gold, creek gold, the small dusty findings that men brought to trading posts, with the particular pride of people who've worked hard for something small. He'd never seen a vein like this. He didn't need technical knowledge to understand what he was looking at. He didn't need anything technical. He looked at Clara. She was 3 feet inside the cave. Her lamp unlit in her hand. She had no use for it. Face slightly tilted, receiving the cave by its sound and its mineral smell, and the warmth from the geothermal water below, and the specific way the silence organized itself in an enclosed space. Her free hand came up slowly. She moved toward the back wall. Her fingers found the rock. Found the place where the texture changed, where the rough granite gave way to the crystalline structure of quartz. A different resistance, a different temperature, a different voice under her fingertips. Her fingers moved slowly across the surface. She found the vein. He watched her face. The lamp in her hand began to shake slightly. Not from cold. Not from weakness. From the specific physical response that happens when a person's body receives information their mind has been waiting years to have confirmed. He was real, she'd said the night before. I want to know that he was real. The tears came without sound. No gasping, no performance. Just her face, and the tears moving down it, and her fingers still on the gold-threaded rock, and her lips moving slightly around something she didn't say out loud. Something for her father, something private. Elias turned away. He went to the cave entrance and stood with his back to her. Listened to the falls. The way you step out of a room when someone is praying, even if you don't know exactly what they're saying to. Buck sat beside him. They both looked at the water falling. After a while. 3 minutes, maybe 5. He didn't count, Clara said. Elias. He turned. Her face was still wet. She hadn't tried to hide it. She stood in the lamplight with her chin up and her eyes, direct at nothing and everything, and said, "He didn't leave me nothing." No, Elias said. He didn't. She nodded once. Then something happened in her face that was the opposite of tears. Not happy exactly. Something harder and cleaner than happy. "All right," she said. "Let's see what we have." They heard the horses at dawn. Elias woke from a thin sleep. He'd been sleeping lighter than usual, which was saying something. with the specific awareness that something outside had changed. Buck was already up, standing at the cave entrance, looking through the falls at the thin morning light on the canyon walls. 4 hoofbeats, maybe 5, moving into the canyon from the south. Elias was on his feet in one motion, at Clara's side in the next. She was already awake, already reaching for her bag. How many? She whispered. 5 or 6 horses. He was already moving their gear toward the back of the cave. Rourke, how long? Minutes. They'll hear the falls. They'll understand what it means. She pulled the pistol from her bag, checked the load with her fingers. Fast, expert. The movements of someone who has rehearsed this in her head many times. He looked at her. This woman, blind, behind a waterfall with a loaded pistol and 6 armed men moving up the canyon. She was calm, not the suppressed panic kind of calm, the real kind. The kind that comes from having made peace with difficult situations before they arrive. Tell me the cave, she said. What? Describe it to me. Exactly. Every position, right. She'd mapped it by feel, but not with the precision of a tactical map. He talked fast. Entrance on the left behind the falls. Cave mouth 12 feet wide at the front, narrowing to 8 at the back. Ceiling 7 feet at its highest. 2 large rock formations on the left wall, large enough to stand behind. She filed it all without writing any of it down. I'll take the left formation, she said, Clara. They'll be looking at you, she said. Nobody aims at what they don't see. He didn't have a better argument. He took position at the cave mouth, not visible from outside, but with a sight line through the thin gap where they'd entered. Clara moved to the left formation. Buck went to the right side of the cave, low, without being asked. Good dog. The horses came into the clearing, 6 men. Rourke in front. Elias recognized command presence when he saw it. A man of maybe 50 with the posture of someone who has spent a career giving orders and having them followed. He looked at the waterfall, at the steam, and his expression changed. He knew not everything, but he knew. Rourke said something to his men, pointed. 2 of them steadied his rifle. This is happening. He thought right now, in November, in a cave. With he stopped thinking. 2 men came through the falls. Elias shot the first in the shoulder. The sound in the enclosed cave was enormous. Like the mountain had a voice and had just used it. The second man scrambled back out, cows outside, horses, shouting. Rourke's voice cutting through both with authority, then 2 more came through. Together. Fast. Elias got one. The other was inside the cave. Armed. Turning. Left wall. 8 feet. Clara's voice. Clear. Immediate. Moving right meant moving toward her. Elias fired into the left wall at 8 feet and heard the man go down. How did she? He didn't finish that thought. Because Rourke came through himself, with the deliberate movement of a man who has assessed the situation and decided he is the solution to it. He came in already looking left, which told Elias he'd gotten information from the men who'd come back out, and swung his rifle toward the cave mouth. Elias moved left and Rourke tracked him, and they both fired at nearly the same moment. The shot hit Elias in the left shoulder. Not the shoulder he'd been favoring since October. The other one, as if the mountain believed in symmetry. He went to one knee. Not all the way down, one knee. Came back up. Rourke was recocking. Elias fired first. The shot was imprecise. His shoulder was not cooperating with precision. But it was sufficient. Rourke went back against the cave wall and slid down it. Not dead. But finished for now. Silence except the falls. Always the falls. Continuing its business regardless of what the humans were doing in its cave. Elias, her voice. Right there. Close. She'd crossed the cave without him hearing her. Her hands found his arm. Moved up to the shoulder. He could feel the blood soaking through and through. She asked. He checked. Yes, then it's manageable. I know it's manageable. You're sweating. I was just shot. Some men go into shock. I'm not in shock. Good. Her hands were already working. Cloth from her coat lining. Pressed to the wound with firm, even pressure. Tell me what's outside. He looked through the falls. 4 men on horses. Rourke down inside, 2 down inside. 1 outside I can account for. That leaves 1 unaccounted for. Yes, then Buck's bark. The sharp kind. Warning and a voice from outside, clear through the falls. I have the man at the back of the canyon, not Rourke's voice. Different. That's Seth, Elias said. Clara's hands stilled on his shoulder. Through the falls, he watched Seth emerge from somewhere in the upper canyon walls. He'd found a way through the rock, and positioned himself at the far end, which put the 4 remaining mounted men between him and the cave. Flanked from both sides, the 4 men looked at each other, at Rourke's horse, riderless in the clearing, at the cave that had swallowed men and not given them back, at Seth Cord, who stood at the far end of the canyon with a rifle and the complete stillness of a man who is not bluffing. One turned his horse, the others followed, without drama, without haste, but going, definitively, in the direction of elsewhere. Seth lowered his rifle. He stood in the canyon and looked at his hands. Both of them. The way you look at your hands when you're checking what they've done, and deciding what that means about the kind of person you are. Then he came forward. He came through the falls directly. Through the middle, getting soaked because he didn't know about the thin edge on the left, and came into the cave dripping, and found his brother, on one knee with a woman pressing a makeshift bandage to his shoulder. He stood there a moment. Then, I should have come sooner, to Elias. Not about today, about everything. Elias looked at his brother. You came, he said, which was true, which was enough. For now. They stayed in the cave for 3 days. Elias's shoulder needed it. He was not going to say so. He was constitutionally incapable of saying so. Some architecture of self-reliance, built so deep in him it had become structural. But Clara said it for him, the morning after the ambush, when he suggested they could start back. You were shot yesterday, she said. I'm aware. Sit down, Clara. Elias. He sat down. Seth proved useful in ways that complicated everything. Elias was still working out about how to feel about him. He knew how to pack a wound properly, better than Elias, which was irritating. He knew the canyon's small game and kept them fed, without depleting what was there. He kept watch through the nights with the ease of someone, for whom darkness is a professional tool rather than an obstacle. 8 years. They didn't account for the 8 years in one conversation. They didn't sit down and attempt to sum it up. It came out in pieces, the way real things do. While Seth tended the fire, while they ate, in the dark hours when the falls made enough sound to carry a voice without broadcasting it, Seth had survived Wyoming by going to ground. A farm family outside Casper had taken him in. He'd been badly hurt, had spent months recovering. By the time he could travel, he'd heard that Elias had left Montana entirely. He'd sent one letter to the last address he had for Elias. No answer, which could have meant anything. Elias looked at him. Rebecca and Owen died in the spring of '78, he said. I left after. Seth closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. I didn't know, he said. No, and Decker's mine. Yes. Seth was quiet for a long time. I knew he was a hard man, he said finally. I knew the work I was doing wasn't. I knew what kind of work it was. I told myself there was a line I wouldn't cross. He looked at the fire. Why was wrong about where the line was? Or I moved it without noticing. Which amounts to the same thing in the end. Elias didn't absolve him, he also didn't condemn him. Because absolution wasn't his to give, and condemnation served nothing now. What served something was the next action, and the action after that. You're going to take the evidence to a federal marshal, Elias said. Pruitt's statement. A written account of what you told me about the Kessler Flats water supply. You're going to do this yourself, and you're going to say what you know. That implicates me. Yes, Seth looked at him. You know that? Yes. A silence. All right, Seth said. Clara had been sitting near the cave wall, her back against the rock, through all of this. Not withdrawn. Listening in the way she listened to everything. Fully, without performing attention, simply receiving it. Settling something inside herself. Processing something that had needed time and quiet to process. On the second evening she called Elias over. He sat beside her. I need to tell you something, she said. He waited. The first night, she said. In your cabin. When I woke up and you thought I was still asleep. He went very still. He remembered the night she meant. The second night of her fever, She'd seemed to settle into something quieter, and he'd thought she'd turned the corner, and he'd sat by the fire and done what he sometimes did in the late hours when the defenses wore thin. He'd talked to Rebecca, not to the room, to Rebecca specifically. The way you talk to someone who isn't there but whom you haven't finished talking to, because finishing would mean something final. He'd said things about Owen, about the years since, about the man he'd become up here on the mountain, and whether that man was what he was supposed to be, or just the version of a man who had decided was sufficient. He'd said he was sorry several times. He'd said, "I should have kept us away from that town. I should have known. I'm sorry. I keep being sorry and it doesn't accomplish anything, and I am anyway." He had believed Clara was asleep. "I heard it," Clara said. "All of it." He looked at the fire. "I knew from that night," she said. "I knew what kind of person you were." She stopped, started again. Men who apologize to people who can't hear them anymore. Who say those things in the dark when they believe no one is listening. A pause. Those men are not the men who turn women in for $200. He didn't say anything. "I tested you anyway," she said. "I know that wasn't fair. I made you prove it in ways you didn't know you were being tested. Because I'd been burned before by people I thought were safe." Another pause. "I needed to be certain. Not almost certain. Certain. Are you certain now?" he said. "I've been certain for weeks," she said. "I should have told you sooner." He turned to look at her. Her face in the lamplight. The old scars and the new ones, and the complete absence of apology in the way she held herself. Not defiance, not armoring. Just the settled posture of a woman who has survived what has been done to her by refusing, with a consistency that bordered on the absolute, to become smaller because of it. "Clara," he said. "Don't make it sentimental," she said. "I wasn't." "You had that tone." "What tone?" "The tone you get when you're about to say something you'll be embarrassed about tomorrow." He looked at the fire. "Fair enough," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth moved in the involuntary way it moved sometimes. Before the deciding part of her brain got involved, he looked back at the fire. The falls ran buck. Near the cave mouth, lifted his head, looked at them both, put his head back down, apparently satisfied. Seth left on the fourth morning. He took the documentation. Pruitt's signed statement, dated and specific. A written account in Elias's hand of Seth's confirmation about the Kessler Flats water supply. A rough map of the Whispering Lodi's location, sealed in oilcloth and addressed to the federal marshal's office in Milford. He was going to Milford. 2 days south and east, the nearest town with a federal presence. He and Elias stood at the canyon entrance in the early light. The things that needed to be said were mostly too large for the time available. So they said the smaller things, the practical things, route, names. How long to wait before assuming something had gone wrong? Then Seth said, "After this is settled, will you stay up here?" Elias looked at the canyon. At the way the early light worked on the walls, "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Seth nodded. He had the look of a man who wanted to say several more things and was making peace with not having time for them. "We have time," Elias said. "After." Seth nodded again. He went. Elias watched the canyon absorb his brother's figure the way these mountains absorbed everything eventually. Completely. And without particular opinion about it, he went back to Clara. They spent one more day in the cave. Because of his shoulder. Because they needed to rest. Because, though neither of them said this, the cave had become something over 3 days that it hadn't been when they'd arrived. Not just the place they'd sheltered. Something with weight to it. Something they weren't entirely ready to leave. Clara spent the morning with her hands on the back wall. On the vein. Not assessing it. Not planning. Just touching it. The way you touch something you need to make real by contact. The way you touch proof. Elias sat within the lamp and watched the gold in the quartz and thought about Joseph Whitmore. A man who had hidden his life's work in his daughter's senses. Who had trusted memory over paper, love over institution. Who had been killed for a fortune he'd never extracted a single ounce of. And whose daughter had walked half-blind through Montana territory in October with nothing but his stories. And found it. Found exactly what he'd promised. "We take enough to matter," Clara said, without turning from the wall. "Not enough to announce agreed. Enough to get a lawyer. Enough to keep Pruitt's family safe while this plays out. Enough that I can stop moving." A pause. "Enough that I can choose where I am instead of just being where I end up." He looked at her. "And the rest?" he asked. "Stays here." She turned from the wall. "It's been here a long time. It can stay longer." Her voice was different now when she talked about her father. Still grief in it. Always grief. But underneath the grief, something had shifted. Something had been put back in the right place. He used to say, "The mountain keeps what you give it honestly, and gives it back when you're ready." Elias looked at the falls, at the constant water, at the cave that had been sitting here, unchanged, since before any of them were born. "That would be sitting here unchanged long after. We'll need to decide," he said carefully. "After Decker is dealt with, what you do next." I know," she said. "You could go anywhere. I know that too." He was quiet. "Where would you go?" she asked. "If you went somewhere," he thought about that. He thought about the cabin. 4 years of solitude in it, the south window. The second chair that hadn't been used in years, before Clara had sat in it and immediately identified the draft in the north wall. "I'd build something bigger," he said. The cabin was built for one person, a silence. "How much bigger?" she said. "Depends," he said. "On what? On how many people are going to be in it." "Longer." She turned toward him, not quite his eyes but close, as close as she ever got, which was close enough to be unsettling in a way he'd stopped trying to understand and had started accepting. "You're terrible at this," she said. "I'm aware. 4 sentences and you still haven't." "Clara." "What?" "Stay," he said. One word. She didn't answer immediately. She was not a woman who answered immediately. She took things seriously and felt them all the way through before she gave them language. The falls ran. Buck lifted his head, looked at them both, put his head back down, apparently satisfied with the trajectory of events. "I'll need a place to put my things," she said finally. "You have a bag. It's not that many things. That's not the point." "I know. Good." She turned back toward the wall, away from him. But her posture had changed. Something in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Then we'll figure it out when we get back." He looked at her, at the lamplight on her hair, at the scars and the strength, and the woman who had survived everything that had been done to her by refusing, with a consistency that was almost theological in its completeness, to become small because of it. "Rebecca," he thought. "I found something. I think you'd like her. She wouldn't be impressed by you immediately. She'd make you earn it. But I think you'd like her." He didn't say that out loud, he said. "Tomorrow morning we head back." "Yes," Clara said. "Long route. 4 days with my shoulder, I know. The weather could." "Elias." "What?" "I know all of that. I've been calculating it all morning. A beat. I don't need you to worry on my behalf. I need you to rest your shoulder." He sat down. "That's what I thought," she said. They left the cave on the 5th day, early, before full light. The canyon was blue and cold, and the falls sent up its small steam into the frigid air, and the sound of it followed them for the first quarter-mile, until the canyon walls curved and took it away. The gold was in Elias's pack. Carefully selected, enough to matter, not enough to announce. Clara had chosen each piece by touch in the lamplight, her fingers finding the heaviest concentrations, with the same accuracy she brought to everything. He hadn't questioned her selections. She knew what she was looking for. She'd always known. They moved through the canyon and back into the open mountain, and the world opened up the way it does at high elevation in the early morning. Enormous and indifferent and beautiful, in the way of things that are not beautiful for your sake, but simply are what they are. And you are welcome to it. Clara walked beside him. She'd found her pace on this terrain over the past weeks. The mountain was in her now, in the way her feet read the ground, in the economy of her movement, in the specific way she tilted her head when the wind changed. She'd taken it in the way she took everything in, completely, through every available sense, until it became part of her, rather than something she was moving through. Buck moved ahead, The air was cold and would stay cold. But the wind was down, and the sky was clear, and the kind of light that comes off fresh snow at a low angle was turning everything to copper and rose. "What does it look like?" Clara said. He'd stopped being surprised when she asked this. "The light's coming from the east," he said. "Low. The snow's catching it and throwing it back upward. Everything's orange, rose. The kind of light that only lasts a few minutes before the sun gets too high." She turned her face toward the east. He watched her receive it. The way she received things that weren't sight, fully. Without mourning what they weren't. Without spending any of her attention on the loss that they represented. Just taking what was available, and taking it completely. "My father used to say, 'The mountain puts on its good clothes in the morning,'" she said. "Because it knows someone's watching." He looked at the mountains. At the gold in the light, and the light in the gold in the place where the sky met the ridge in a line, so clean it looked deliberate. Like something had decided this was the exact right place for the world to end, and the sky to begin. He was right, Elias said. They walked. And somewhere to the south, Seth Cord was carrying 3 years of buried truth toward the man with the authority to do something about it. And somewhere in Brentwick, Harlan Decker was going about his comfortable morning, not yet knowing that the careful architecture of 4 years of unpunished decisions was about to develop its first serious fracture. And here, in the mountain light, 2 people walked. One who had spent 4 years learning to live without, one who had spent 3 years surviving on what she remembered, and between them, not named, not spoken about, but present the way important things are present before they're acknowledged, the beginning of something, not simple. These things never are, not certain. Nothing in the mountains ever is, but present, which is how everything real begins. They came down out of the mountains on the 8th day. Seth was at the Pruitt homestead when they arrived. He'd ridden hard to Milford and back. He looked it, the look of a man who has done something difficult and is standing on the other side of it, taking stock of what the doing cost. "The marshal has the documentation," Seth said. "He's sending men to Brentwick within the week." Elias nodded. "Decker's warrant on Clara is suspended pending investigation." Marshall's words. Seth looked at Clara. "You're not wanted right now. Not formally." Clara stood in the clearing of the Pruitt homestead, still. Her face turned toward the weak afternoon sun, with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Receiving it, not performing the receiving of it. "And you?" Elias asked his brother. "I gave my statement," Seth said. "All of it, including my part." A pause. "The marshal said to stay available, are you?" "Yes." They stood in the cold afternoon. The Pruitt children were visible through the window. The girl, Martha, who couldn't hear well, pressing both hands against the glass and waving at Clara with the enthusiasm of someone who had decided, on very limited evidence, that this was a person worth waving at with full commitment. Clara turned toward the window. Some sense of presence, some reading of the light changing, some sound too subtle for Elias to identify. She raised her hand. Martha beamed so hard it was visible through the glass. Meg Pruitt appeared at the door. "You'll stay the night," she said, "not a question." None of them argued with it, that evening. Firelight and the smell of a real meal, and the sound of children who have been successfully put to bed, settling into quiet. Walt Pruitt at the table with his hands around a cup, looking at Clara with the expression of a man who has put something down after carrying it for a long time, and is still not entirely sure how to hold himself without the weight of it. Meg Pruitt moving quietly around the room, with the competence of someone who keeps everything running. Seth with his hands wrapped around coffee, looking into it the way men look into things they're still working out. And Clara beside Elias, closer than the space required. Not touching. Just beside him. Just there, he thought about the cabin. About the south window and the second chair and 4 years of solitude that had felt, for most of those years, like the correct choice. The only possible choice. The choice a man makes when the world has made clear it will take from him the things he values most. He thought about what Joseph Whitmore had understood. That you don't hide what's precious in things that can be taken. You hide it in people. You give it in language the right person will recognize. You trust that the right person will find it. He looked at Clara. She couldn't see him looking, but she turned her head in his direction. Slightly. Just enough. And the corner of her mouth moved in the way he'd been cataloging for 2 months. The involuntary kind. The kind that if it escapes before she decides whether to show it. He looked back at the fire. 4 walls, he thought, and a south window. Bigger than what I had. Starting in spring, the warrant was formally revoked 12 days later. Harlan Decker was taken into federal custody at his offices in Brentwick on a Tuesday morning in January of 1883. He did not go quietly. He had a great deal to say about his innocence and the incompetence of federal authority, and the rights of men who had built something from nothing in a difficult territory and deserved better than this treatment. The marshal listened politely and took him anyway. The inquiry into the mining operation above Kessler Flats took considerably longer. It would take the better part of a year, moving through layers of documentation and testimony, and the slow, grinding machinery of official accountability, which moves at its own pace regardless of how urgent the truth beneath it is. Some things cannot be hurried. Some things require the simple passage of enough time that enough people see enough to believe what they're being asked to believe. That a man of standing could do what Decker had done. That the water in a town's creek could be poisoned by the operation on the ridge above it. That a blind woman could be the most credible witness in the room. But it started. That was what mattered. It started, and in the mountains, in a cave, behind a waterfall that didn't freeze. A vein of gold waited in its quartz with the patience of something that has been there a very long time and is not concerned about waiting a little longer. Spring came late that year, but it came. The cabin they built was in a south-facing valley that Elias had known about for 3 years without having had any reason to use it. He'd found it in his second autumn in the mountains, running a new trap line north of his usual range, and he'd stood in it and thought this would be a good place, without being able to articulate good for what. He knew now. It took most of the spring to build. The ground was frozen until late April, which was later than most years, and then the thaw came fast and turned everything soft at once and delayed the foundation work. Seth helped when he wasn't needed elsewhere, and he was needed elsewhere for a while, dealing with the ongoing legal weight of what he'd said to the marshal and what that meant for the cases being built. But he came when he could. He worked hard when he came. He and Elias talked in the evenings, with the particular care of 2 men who have a great deal of accumulated conversation to work through and are proceeding carefully, the way you proceed carefully with something important. And the cabin had a south window and an east window for the morning light, and a west-facing door that opened onto a view of the mountains that Elias had always known was there and had always privately considered one of the better views available in this part of Montana. He'd built the door to face it on purpose. Some things you build around what you know is worth facing. On the first evening in the finished cabin, Clara walked every room, her hands on every wall, her feet reading every board. He didn't follow her. Some things a person needs to do alone. The private work of making a place into a place you know, making it yours through the specific intimacy of touch and sound and the body's memory. When she finished, she stood in the center of the main room. The south window, she said. Yes, it'll get light in the afternoon. Yes, she nodded, satisfied. Filing it away in the specific way she stored information, completely, accurately, permanently. Then, you stood here before you finished the floor. I can feel where you stood. He looked at where she was standing. She was right. He'd stood there when the walls were up and the roof was on, but the floor was still rough board. And he'd stood exactly there and looked at the space and thought about who would fill it, who would need these dimensions, what the cabin would have to be the right size for the life that was going to happen in it. How do you know that? He said. She tapped the floor with her foot. The boards are worn in a slightly different direction here. Someone stood and shifted weight, more than once. Someone who was deciding something. He looked at the floor. You were deciding if it would work, she said. If the dimensions were right. He looked at her. Were they? She asked. Yes, he said. She nodded once. And that was all. Because some things are said, completely in a yes and a nod. And the fact of two people standing in a room they built together. In a valley the maps don't show, in the mountains that keep what you give them honestly, and give it back when you're ready. The fire was already laid in the hearth. He'd laid it before they moved anything else in, because some things should be ready before you need them. He lit it. It caught immediately. The dry wood taking the flame, the way dry wood takes flame when someone has laid it with care, quickly, cleanly, with the commitment of something that has been prepared. Outside, the evening settled over the mountains, the way evenings settle in these places. Slowly, and with intention, as if the dark is something the mountain chooses, rather than something that simply happens to it. The first stars came up in the east. Then more. Then the whole sky opened into the thing it becomes at high elevation. When the light is gone, and the air is clear, and there is nothing between you and what's above, Clara stood at the south window. She couldn't see the stars, but she turned her face toward them anyway. The way she turned her face toward things she wanted to receive. The way she turned toward the morning light on the mountain on the day they walked out of the canyon. As if seeing were a thing the whole body did, rather than just the eyes. He stood behind her, not touching, just present. Tell me, she said. So he did. He told her about the first star and the second, and the way they appeared in sequence, each one placed with what seemed like deliberateness, as if the sky were making decisions about what to reveal and when. He told her about the color of the sky at the last of the light, the deep blue that isn't quite black yet, that exists only in the few minutes of genuine transition and then is gone. He told her about the snow on the far ridge holding the last light longer than everything else, so it glowed slightly, just slightly, like something the mountain was keeping, for one last minute before letting the dark have it. He talked for longer than he intended. She didn't interrupt. When he finally stopped, the valley was fully dark, and the fire behind them was the loudest thing in the world, and Buck was asleep somewhere near the hearth, with the complete commitment of a dog who has decided the day is finished, he told me. Clara said quietly that if I ever couldn't find my way, if I was ever completely lost, I should stop moving and listen. Because the mountain always tells you where you are. A pause. I always thought he meant the literal mountain. He waited. He didn't just mean the literal mountain, she said. No, he hadn't. Elias looked at the dark valley, and the stars and the far ridge and the mountains that had been here before any of them were born and would be here long after. Mountains that kept what was given to them honestly, and gave it back in their own time, on their own terms, in the way they decided was right. You found it, he said. Everything he hid for you? Yes, she said. Was it what you expected? A silence. It was better, she said. Some of it was what I expected. And some of it, she stopped. Some of it I didn't know to expect. He understood that. He understood it completely. Because 4 years ago he'd come up into these mountains to be done with the world. To be done with what the world could take from you. To reduce his life to the functional and the survivable and the simple. Because simple things were harder to lose. He'd been content with that. Or close enough to content that he hadn't examined it too carefully. Hadn't asked whether surviving and living were the same thing, because asking would have required acknowledging they might not be. And then October, and a cougar, and a scream in the pines. And a woman who weighed less than she should, and gripped his coat with more determination than physics should have allowed, and who had woken up blind in a stranger's cabin and immediately begun building a map of it by sound. He looked at the back of her head, at her face turned toward the stars she couldn't see. She led me to the gold, he thought. And then, 'cause it was true. And to something that matters more, the fire spoke behind them. The mountain kept its silence, not the silence of something empty, but the silence of something that has been here a very long time. and has learned that most things worth saying don't need to be said aloud. Outside, the wind moved through the pines in the way it does at night in these mountains. Low, persistent, finding every gap, saying nothing specific, saying everything. And Clara Whitmore stood at the south window of a cabin that had been built with her dimensions in mind, in a valley that didn't appear on any map Harlan Decker had ever owned. In mountains that kept what was given honestly, and she didn't need to see it to know she was home.